In this portion, we are introduced to Moses. We open up about the birth of Moses. And the birth of Moses is associated with several references and stories which are mentioned in the Torah. One is the defiance of the midwives. When Pharaoh decreed that all the boys should be cast into the Nile River, all boys should be killed, the midwives defied Pharaoh's decree. As a result of that defiance of Pharaoh's decree, Moses was born. The correlation is Moses was the one who God entrusted in teaching us Torah, morals, values, what is right and what is wrong. What is right and what is wrong is something above us. And his very birth came about because there were individuals who risked their lives doing what is right. And that's how he was born. Secondly, I mentioned before about Miriam, his older sister. So there's a reference in the Torah that in chapter 2, and a man of the house of Levi went and took a daughter of Levi. Who was this talking about? So Rashi fills in the gap based upon the teaching in Midrash. This was a reference to Moses' parents, as it mentions. So we know it's the parents of Moses are Amram and Yocheved. That we know. But wait a second. Here, the Torah describes that Moses is born. But we know later on in the Torah that Moses has two older siblings, Aaron and Miriam. So why over here does it mention, and now a man from the house of Levi went and took the daughter of Levi? It happened before that. It happened before his birth. They already had Miriam, and they already had Aaron. So why does it mention over here? So the Midrash fills in the gap. What's the gap? As a result of this decree that all boys should be thrown into the Nile River, Amram separated from his wife Yocheved. Why did he separate? Why should we bring children into this world to be killed? It's not right. We're bringing children into this world in order to be killed. And so he separated. Now Amram was a leader. The tribe of Levi were leaders among the Jewish people. Amram was a leader. As a result of that, many followed suit. They did the same thing. And so Miriam turns to her father and says, "Father, what you are doing is worse than Pharaoh." Imagine a 7-year-old turning to her father saying that. What you're doing is worse than Pharaoh. Huh? What I'm doing is worse than Pharaoh? How'd you say that? Imagine a daughter telling the father, "You're worse than a Nazi." That's basically what she's saying to him. You're worse than Pharaoh. How are you worse than Pharaoh? Because Pharaoh's decree is only on the boys. But your action is having an impact on both the boys and girls. Because you separating yourself from mommy is preventing any children being born, and others are following your example. And no children are being born. No boys, no girls. So what you're doing, in a sense, is worse than Pharaoh. He followed her advice. Based upon this, later on in the Torah, Miriam is referred to as Miriam the prophetess. Rashi itself asks, why prophetess? How is she a prophetess? What did she prophesy about? She prophesied at the age of 7. Her inspiration and encouragement to her parents, to her father mainly, to to reunite with his mother was in a sense prophecy. Because of her insight to her father, Moses was born. So another layer of responsibility that brought about the birth of Moses. Those who were defiant and did not kill the Jewish boys. Second, you have Miriam, who inspired her father to reunite with his mother and inspired others to reunite with their wives and have children. Yes, tragically, there were boys thrown into the Nile River. But number one, you had girls born. And you had Moses that was born. Then you had the story about how the mother of Moses tried to hide the birth of Moses, because the casting into the Nile River was not just now placed in the hands of the midwives, because Pharaoh got the gist that something's going wrong. And so he appointed within the Egyptians those who found Jewish baby boys and had them cast into the Nile River. So they hid Moses. Moses was born prematurely. Why would they hide him? He was born prematurely so they could hide him. They would calculate, when does this person do, and so on, and they would make house checks. And here, the baby was born prematurely, and she hid him for 3 months. Once he was hidden, they couldn't hide him any longer. The Torah describes how mother and daughter placed Moses in a basket and secured the basket, that it should be waterproofed, placed the baby in a basket, ironically in the Nile River. So technically speaking, Moses was cast into the Nile, but in a basket. And how was he saved? Through someone else who defied Pharaoh's orders and decrees. And this defiance comes actually from the house of Pharaoh. The daughter of Pharaoh, Batya, the daughter of Pharaoh, she defied her own father. She sees a basket floating along the Nile, and her curiosity, what is this? She reaches out. Interestingly, the Torah tells us, also based upon the teachings of Midrash and Rashi, that when it says she sent her arm, when she sent her arm, meaning when you say she reached out, when she sent her arm, because it was hard to reach, it was out of her reach. Yet she makes the effort of extending her arm beyond her reach and bring it and reaching out to this basket. So as the basket was brought to her, she brings the basket, she notices a baby boy. This must be one of the Hebrews. She saw the baby was circumcised. It was a circumcised child. And in addition to that, why is this child in a basket in the Nile? This is obviously someone trying to save a child. One of the Hebrews. And so she takes this child as her own, defying her own father. She asks her midwives to nurse the child and sees that the child would not nurse from the Egyptian midwives, which is something which was remarkable. Again, Rashi points out that here you have someone who is destined to be the one who will be the mouthpiece, communicating God's word to the Jewish people from Egyptian midwives. He doesn't nurse from the Egyptian midwives. But you have now another fascinating account which the Torah shares. That when Miriam and Yocheved placed a basket in the Nile River, Miriam, the older sister, was walking along the Nile River watching the basket from afar. So he wasn't just placed into a basket and just abandoned. Miriam was watching from afar what will happen, which is also a fascinating description. Remember, we mentioned that Miriam was a prophetess. She encouraged her parents to reunite. On what premise? The premise of, your decree is worse than Pharaoh's. Pharaoh's decree is on the boys, and your decree is on the boys and girls. So, her parents reunite. Her mother is expecting. Mazel tov, a baby is born. What do you think she may have anticipated the baby would be? A girl. To make her point. Look, you have a girl. As a result of your union, a baby girl was born. See? I encourage you to reunite because your decree was worse than Pharaoh's. Pharaoh's was on the boys. Yours decree by separating from mommy is on the boys and girls. Look, you had a baby girl. But Mazel had it the way it was. It was a baby boy. Uh-oh. I'm done. So what does she do? They hide the baby. But now the baby is put into this basket in the Nile River. She doesn't abandon. She follows the basket to see what will happen next. Torah describes she stands from the distance to see what will happen. In a sense, it's not only what will happen to Moses, but what will happen as a result of her inspiration, her quote-unquote prophecy. Here she encouraged her parents to get married, to remarry, to reunite. And look what happens to the baby. The baby is now thrown into the Nile River. And just not long after she's following, she sees something fascinating unfolding. The baby is drifting towards Pharaoh's palace. She follows. The princess of Egypt goes down to bathe. She's still following. What is going on? What is going to happen? She sees the princess of Egypt reaching out, taking the baby. She didn't just throw the baby back into the Nile, take the baby out of the basket and just throw him into the Nile. She actually takes the baby as her own. She sees that she's giving him to midwives and there are problems. She's still watching from a distance. And then as she sees that there are problems, little 7-year-old Miriam pops out and says, maybe I can help. Really? How can you help? Because it seems that the baby is not nursing because it's a Hebrew baby. Maybe I can find a Hebrew midwife that will nurse the baby. Brilliant idea. Get me someone. And so she actually calls the mother, bringing the mother to Batya and seeing how this will play itself out. Batya nurses her own child and the baby is nursing. This is great. This is fabulous. And so she hires Yocheved, the mother of Moses, to nurse the baby. And now the baby is being raised by her mother, legally, with pay to nurse baby Moses. Eventually, as Moses grows up, as a young lad, he's brought back into the palace, and this is where Moses' early years are being formed. First of all, with his parents, but then brought into the palace. All of this is about the formation of Moses. So we read about that Moses' birth comes about as a result of defiance. People who risk their lives to do what is right, what is morally correct. We read about the midwives defying, not throwing the babies in the Nile River, or not killing the babies as they were born. We read about Miriam, who defies her own father, in a sense, speaks to her father and asks, Father, what you're doing is worse than Pharaoh. As a result, baby Moses is born. She herself is risking her life, risking herself, endangering herself by following the baby and now into the grounds of the royal palace. And little 7-year-old has the chutzpah to start interacting with the princess of Egypt. What does that take? All of this is about Moses' birth. It took self-sacrifice to do what is right for Moses to be born.